I'm going to go through some key talking points of the 2024 Republican GOP platform for Donald Trump, and fact-check as I go with a variety of sources and statistics directly from the corresponding places of government, fact-checking organizations, etc. And I will specify on the screen and in the description with specific sources so you can read more about it yourself or see it for yourself. Let's start. 2024 GOP platform, Make America Great Again. America First, a return to common sense. Past the preamble, the first claims are simple. Donald J. Trump was elected as an unapologetic champion of the American people. He reignited the American spirit and called on us to renew our national pride. His policies spurred historic economic growth, job creation, and a resurgence in American manufacturing. Unfortunately, as far as policy goes, after researching, none of that seems to be accurate. As far as GDP growth and GDP per capita, the GDP increase year over year was 2.24% in his first year, 2.95% in his second year, 2.29%, and finally, negative 2.77%, with exception to his final year in office. So, before considering COVID in this final year, the economic growth stayed virtually the same as Obama's economy from the 2010 recovery to the 2008 housing crisis in these metrics, until the beginning of Trump's term. In fact, if you were to look at the graph without seeing the years, you would probably have a difficult time telling when Obama ended and when Trump began. A reminder, though, of two things, and this is something that'll be important as I talk about specific dates in the future. Trump began his term on January 20th, 2017, when he was sworn into office, and it ends in January 20th of 2021, when Biden was sworn into office. This will be important to address the future claims, especially as we compare them to the Biden presidency, as the GOP platform specifically does. The U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics also lists job loss growth and total trends per quarter each year. For quarters, I will count June as the starting point for presidencies, since it's hard to blame a first quarter job economy on someone who wasn't in for a full first quarter. So that's being equally fair both to Trump, Biden, and anybody else who would run in the future. June 2017 to March of 2021, job creation either stayed roughly the same or was lower than job creation under Barack Obama. This is until COVID hits in 2020, to which we see an initial 836,000 job loss in the March quarter, followed by a 14,538,000 job loss in the second quarter, and then recovering to a positive 4 million job gain and a 2 million job recovery in the last two quarters. Now, I'm not going to blame Trump for the unprecedented worldwide pandemic situation. There was liable to be some type of large hit to every economy in the world, under any presidency. But I at least think it's worth noting that this type of catastrophic loss, undoing the net job creation of his entire presidency and putting it in the red, as well as undoing the last 2 years of job creation under Obama, it's worth mentioning, too, that in September 2017's quarter, the net jobs were negative, losing 39,000 jobs. The first time for this to happen in a quarter since the 2008 housing crisis in Obama's first term. So before COVID, he was basically the same as Obama with a few weak quarters. And once COVID hit, it was a massive spike, making it so that the peak unemployment at the end of Trump's term was over 8%, 8.09. That is to say, from a purely objective standard, there was not historic economic growth or job creation, at least in any sort of broad way that people would generally interpret it. Maybe some small job sector had a historic boost, but the broad trend of the economy was anything but historic, aside from the decades-low negative job creation and unemployment caused amidst the COVID crisis. It's also an unbefitting characterization to say that American manufacturing had a resurgence. From the start of Trump's presidency, manufacturing jobs bounced between 2 and negative 2%, and as of February 2019, it only remained in the negative until Biden took office. Meaning for a full year before COVID hit, manufacturing was down every month between negative 1 and negative 3%. Once COVID did hit, the worst month, April 2020, saw manufacturing hit a record low of negative 19.5%, a number not seen since the 1940s. Even through the height of the 2008 financial crisis, it came close, capping at a negative 18% in its worst month of 2009. So, okay, ignoring COVID, Trump was a slightly below average president on jobs and the economy. An objective downturn from Obama, but mostly the same, at least by these specific metrics, which I think are the most obviously representative of America's economy as a whole. These are the successes that the Republican Party and GOP were touting as their opening success for their 2024 platform statement. The next claim of the GOP platform statement is this: "Yet after 4 years of the Biden administration, America is now rocked by raging inflation, open borders, rampant crime, attacks on our children, and global conflict, chaos, and instability." So, as for what is specifically mentioned, let's say the clear ones here are high inflation, immigration, and high crime rates. The most valid of these is high inflation, although it's a selective argument. The 2 years leading into Biden's term, as I've shown, there was a consistent job loss for over 2 years, manufacturer closures, and heightened unemployment rates, to the extent not seen since 2009 and in some cases not seen since the late 1940s. Inheriting an economic downfall of this caliber and not seeing inflation hit back is pretty unreasonable, especially as the economic downturn and height of inflation hit in 2021. By 2022, the unemployment rate had already been halved of what it was when Trump left office, and by 2023 had dropped back down to 3%, meaning that the current inflation rate has already stabilized and is only 1% higher than Trump pre-COVID. Looking at such a steep and obviously historic recovery, just looking at the graphs, the recovery is hard to blame negatively. COVID was a sort of worldwide economic force. It was neither something I would completely reasonably blame on Trump or Biden. But that's largely the thing. Even if I have some issues with how Trump handled it, the whole world suffered from the pandemic, and if I'm not going to blame Trump for the huge downfall in his last year as president, it doesn't seem to make any sense or be fair to blame Biden for the inflation that was a direct result of that exact same aforementioned downfall. Especially with how quickly the inflation rate restabilized back down to where it was pre-COVID. One couldn't honestly say that inflation is currently raging, as this increase over pre-COVID Trump policy is the same increase as Trump over Obama, and there wasn't an economic crisis to recover from in 2017. As a sort of last note on the economy, Trump's final numbers, as they were when he left office, came to corporate profits increasing by 17.4%, but household income only going up by 6%, meaning workers were getting paid less for their work compared to their employers as the term went on. Home prices also increased by 27.5% under Trump's presidency, and again, we lost a net 178,000 manufacturing jobs. One of the main things that Trump promised before his term and has continued to pretend and claim was a success during this election cycle, despite being provably and undisputably false. I'll do crime next, since it won't take as long as the immigration thing. The Brennan Center for Justice and the CCJ, or Council on Criminal Justice, show a general increase from the beginning of the pandemic that peaks in 2021, followed by a steady downfall afterwards, with exception to a slight but noticeable increase in property crimes in 2022. Of course, we don't have a lot of definitive data for 2023, and this year, 2024, since it's not over, doesn't have its proper statistics out either. I mean, this year's only half over. But based on the change from 2020 to 2022, looking at the data from the major United States cities, the national murder rate was down by 6.7%, property crime down by 0.5% nationally. And generally speaking, looking at Trump and Biden next to each other, very similarly to the pre-COVID Trump era to Obama before him, you can't easily tell where Trump ends and Biden begins, as this trend has been a pretty flat line with steady decline since 2011 and a much more drastic decline since the 90s. In fact, violent crime is at the second lowest point it's ever been, aside from pre-COVID 2019. So, let's get into arguably the biggest talking point of the Trump administration, the crisis on our southern border, or illegal immigration. I'm sure that you've all heard prominent figures in the GOP broadly talk on this as well. Here are some possibly familiar quotes. Nikki Haley claims that 8 million have come in illegally, and that we have to send them back. A number also repeated by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas said on Fox News Sunday that Biden had allowed an invasion to occur on our border. Almost 10 million migrants have crossed into our country. On CNN's State of the Union, Marco Rubio stated more conservatively that 3.3 million people have been released into the country who arrive here illegally, also claiming Biden had a policy of releasing virtually 85 to 90% of any migrant that crossed the border. The DHS has, of course, released its statistics as from the Office of Homeland Security. The first thing factcheck.org notes about this specific claim is that the data often cited lists all apprehensions, which means many are counted more than once, with a 27% recidivism rate, up 7% from 2019. But since the federal health emergency for COVID-19 has ended, the rate has then dropped 11%. A large section of the people counted at the border also are largely in stasis, considering that they have neither been accepted or rejected and are instead being held at the border and awaiting trial, waiting to either be rejected or approved. So it's hard to say they've really crossed into the country if they aren't even in the country but are waiting to see if they'll be allowed in. From the month that Biden took office until October of 2023, 6.5 million encounters were made at the border, 700,000 arriving legally but without initial authorization to enter, so 5.8 million illegal people crossing the border. Subtract the 27% of repeats. Of those numbers, 2.5 million have been released into the country, but again, a chunk of that is made up of legal immigration, but initially unauthorized entries from the 700,000 included in the initial stat. A spokesperson for the DHS also says that they believe their capture rate is 78%, which does seem to be low. But to quote, under the administration, the estimated annual apprehension rate has averaged 78%, identical to the rate of the prior administration. The people at the border doing their jobs is largely the exact same group of people who are working under the Trump administration, because these are not simply appointed jobs from the president, but are largely administrative jobs. From both administrations, few policies have actually changed aside from the effects of lifting the COVID health emergency guidelines. That means that since Biden has taken office, the rate to which immigrants are caught and refused or let in is not significantly different than it was under Trump. However, due to the COVID crisis, the raw amount of people who are trying to cross the border has increased. So there is a slight increase in people, just not in the actual percent or change of policy. The numbers Haley and DeSantis give, then, are the totals of all migrant encounters, including repeat customers, so to say, as well as hypothetical people who got in without being caught, and in the case of Tom Cotton's exaggeration, also including immigrants from Canada, coastal borders, and all American airports. This seems very blatantly dishonest, so the people at factcheck.org reached out to Cotton's press secretary, Patrick McCann, for comment. And in response, he told them that the figures show that the senator was correct to say that the number had, quote-unquote, crossed into the country. This seems to be doubling down on extremely tight legal speak. It's essentially the Bill Clinton, "it depends what the definition of is" statement. So after being confronted with the fact that 27% of this number are people that are counted multiple times, as well as including 2.5 million near immediate expulsions from the country, not including all those still awaiting trial as well, many of which to be turned away, there is no frame of reference from which someone could call Tom Cotton of Arkansas's remarks honest. But it also shows bad faith as he voted against the border bills proposed during the current administration as well. A bipartisan bill brokered over 4 months between the Republicans and Democrats, Trump weighed in and told Republicans to vote no because if the border wasn't that much of an issue, it could harm his re-election chances. Senator James Lankford, Republican from Oklahoma, stated on Fox News, said about the situation,
"They killed it. Ironically, not Democrats."
Right. It was, and it was painful to be able to watch it. It got stirred up in all the presidential politics, and several of my colleagues started looking for ways. After President Trump said, don't fix anything during the presidential election, it's the single biggest issue during the election, don't resolve this, we'll resolve it next year. Quite a few of my colleagues backed up, looked for a reason to be able to shoot against it, and then walked away. I get that. That's a decision everybody makes in it. My issue is if we're pursuing everything, we very often end up with nothing. If we're pursuing someone coming later to fix it, later seems to never come. When we have a moment to fix things, we should fix as many things as we can then come back later and fix the rest.
That's on Donald Trump, Senator.
That, again, he's got an office that he's running for. He's got a campaign that he's running. I'm already in office. I've got a responsibility to be able to carry on this.
Republican Senator Lankford also stated an unnamed popular commentator told him flat out, "If you try to move this bill that solved the border crisis during this presidential year, I will do whatever I can to destroy you before the next presidential election." While we should acknowledge this second comment as hearsay, this clearly portrays one of, if not two things. One, that the Republicans who voted against this, like Tom Cotton, know that the border crisis is an exaggerated issue for politics. Or two, they sincerely believe there is a crisis, but would sacrifice the safety of the American people if it meant getting Trump elected once again. Personally, based on the data I've shown and also have cited below, I think it's number one. But if someone is sincerely concerned about the southern border, the second option seems much more sinister and like a betrayal to the people who voted for these elected figures. The GOP party platform then goes through a series of paragraphs stating what common sense tells us. It says, "Common sense tells us blank," and then it fills it in with one of these before-mentioned stated issues, explaining why they find these issues important, but not really stating how they would fix them different from prior. But as I've outlined, the actions of the GOP don't reflect the results of this stated priority. The first new addition to these common sense things, though, is common sense tells us clearly that if we don't have a strong military, we won't be able to defend our interests, and we will be at the mercy of hostile nations. The policy of the Republican Party must be to ensure, then, that America's military is the strongest and best equipped in the world. Looking into the statistics again, Biden has maintained the same year-over-year increase in military spending that Trump started, even upping the rate from 2021 to 2022. Regardless, the American military is the best military in the world, to an almost comically absorbent degree. The United States in 2022 spent $876.94 billion on military expenses, the most out of any country in the entire world, and by a long shot, too. The second place, Saudi Arabia, spent a mere $75.01 billion on the same year, meaning that the United States spends over 8 times more than the next highest spending military and more than the next 40-plus countries beneath us. And that's just because I got sick of adding numbers of less than $1 billion to try and reach the United States numbers. I stopped at like $650 billion. Our military is easily the most bloated part of the American budget, especially since this number doesn't even include resources used to help our veterans. Over Obama's 2 terms, spending towards veterans increased by $100 billion. Under Trump's 1 term, it increased by $34 billion. Under Biden's term, as of 2023, it increased $48 billion, meaning that per term, Biden has already outpaced increased aid to veterans that Trump offered by 25%. And is on track to overpace Obama as well. This is yet to include the last year of his term. So it might lead one to wonder, what type of additional budget is going to be sent to non-veteran military expenses that we aren't already far exceeding? Trump has proposed a plan to build a nationwide Iron Dome defense system that will protect all American skies, the same as Israel has, although much larger due to the obvious difference in nation size. The estimated cost of this has been stated to be $2.5 trillion. But where is this money going to come from? Trump left office his first term, raising the national deficit $8.2 trillion, more than any single term of a president prior, and almost as much as Obama during both of his terms combined, Obama having a little over $9 trillion. The debt spending increased, the immigration policy was virtually the same, record profits were made for corporations, but working families saw less than a quarter of the same payout increase in their paychecks, crime was worse, jobs were lost, even before COVID historically devastated the economy, manufacturing was down. And as a result of this historic downturn, inflation was a natural result of the catastrophic blow to the economy. But this has already returned to near normal in historically record-breaking decreases. You can see it for yourself on basically any graph you look at looking at the American economy. I want to say something positive, just so I can feel more fair and balanced, TM. But the fact is, I already am. These are the things that the GOP platform specifically signaled that it wants to fix in the economy, and these are the things that all were objectively done worse under Trump when they were last given the reins. And it would be different if they were humble and tried to explain what they will do differently, but most people don't even realize the reality that the stats show because Trump just goes on pretending everything was great. He inherited an economy with less than a 1% inflation rate, and it immediately boosted to over 2%, creating less jobs on average and even a net loss jobs one quarter, including 2 years of net loss in manufacturing jobs, and that's before a refusal to help the American people in COVID. Many people attribute the stimulus that was granted to Americans under Trump. I personally thought that that's when it happened as well. But the American Rescue Act was a bill passed under Joe Biden, signed into law by Biden's hand. All citations are in the description once again and have been listed on screen as to the relevant specific ones to link on. Politics isn't a team sport. It's people's lives. Personally, my politics have shifted a bunch over the last 10 years. And that's because I have always tried to understand the truth, and I have, at times, still fallen into bias and gotten things wrong. Hundreds of millions of people, single, married, childless, and quiverful, these are economic facts that do not side with the administration, and these are economic issues that I am only addressing because they specifically gloat that it was a strength, and it is the only thing that Republicans repeatedly poll on as handling better than Democrats. And maybe that has been true. All I've looked at is Obama, Biden, and Trump. And out of those three administrations, Trump clearly had the most economic downturn, even if we were to ignore the obvious effects of the COVID crisis under Trump and Biden. It's no one's fault for being misinformed. Most people are busy. They have full-time jobs, school, church, family, and friend obligations. I had to take multiple hours out of my day researching a lot of this stuff just to get the information. The lack of laws restricting malicious actors from spreading false information on social media means it's more rampant than it's ever been. Radio and TV had far more restrictions that prevented this sort of misinformation from being allowed to fester unchallenged. But in a lot of ways, we're still in the Wild West in regards to how much people are allowed to openly lie without consequence. America has free speech. And I am and have always been an ardent defender of the First Amendment. The classic exceptions are in the case of threats, either directly or like the classic example of screaming fire in a crowded theater, but also slander and libel laws. These laws are rarely used because they require, under American law, an undeniable proof that someone not only told mistruths, but did so deliberately on purpose and with an intent to harm and misinform repeatedly. In the past, short of hearing someone say and admit to the fact that they did that, it used to be almost impossible to prove in a court of law. But in the age of texting, recorded audio, emails, and more, it's becoming more easy to prove these things through discovery. Fox News settled with Dominion Voting Systems in $810 million after willfully lying about election fraud and interference. In discovery, it was found that lead hosts Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and billionaire chair Rupert Murdoch acted dishonestly. Fox said in a statement to quote, "We acknowledge the court's rulings finding certain claims about Dominion to be false." Similar lawsuits towards Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, Mike Lindell, and Patrick Byrne, and the networks One America News and Newsmax, also have cases pending, but are likely to settle or be found guilty, as many are close associates with Fox and close company with many of the people already found guilty. Rival voting company, Smartmatic, has also now filed suit for fraudulent claims and are pending for the court. In private, it was found through discovery of text messages and emails that hosts such as Tucker Carlson repeatedly called these claims about election fraud insane and absurd in private, with Chair Rupert Murdoch even stating in a deposition that he didn't believe the claims and could have easily stopped them from being made, but didn't. Without question, these comments and many others meet criteria for actual malice, a willful disregard to misinform the American people, to betray the sacred duty that is supposed to be the core of news. Lou Dobbs was fired from Fox in 2021 shortly after the Dominion case was filed, with one clip in particular about his rage at an Atlantic article, which reported on Trump calling people who serve at a cemetery suckers and losers. Dobbs called it a hit job, despite information being corroborated by an, at the time, colleague from Fox News, Jennifer Griffin. Privately, Irina Briganti sent 2 clips to Jay Wallace, who was and is the president and executive editor of Fox News Media. He replied to these clips in a private email saying, "Thank you. I watched Lou closely for 2 weeks during conventions. The North Koreans do a more nuanced show." That's what he's saying about the shows on his own network. That's far from all, though. Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and Tucker Carlson repeatedly acknowledge fault while conspiring against coworkers in private. Remember, this isn't some silly celebrity gossip. These are news anchors caught without excuse willfully lying to the American people for months, mocking the claims in private, and then putting on a serious face to undermine the integrity of American democracy. Sidney Powell, too, overstating the case of election fraud so much that Tucker Carlson privately sends a text to her, sending caution, telling her that if she doesn't prove what she's saying soon, it would be cruel and reckless, despite all of it being fake. When the information seemed to be on the way to being made public, Hannity joked in private with Steve Dawsey, "We might as well tell people to stop watching at 9 a.m. and turn the TV back on tonight at 9. Tucker Carlson, in another text, said privately, "We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump on most nights. I truly can't wait. I want nothing more. I hate him passionately. I blew up at Peter Navarro today in frustration. I actually like Peter, but I can't take much more of this." This lie was a continuous one from the top down, a willful continuous lie, proved in court of law through discovery of direct messages and emails sent from those accused. And while Trump's countless associates were hit trying to push a lie, Trump was also actively working to undermine American democracy too. In a leaked audio with Georgia election official, once it became clear that he was going to lose the state, this happened.
So, look, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have.
It was the president here asking you for exactly what he wanted, one more vote than his opponent.
What I knew is that we didn't have any votes to find. We had continued to look. We investigated, like I just shared the numbers with you. There were no votes to find.
Mr. Secretary, after making this request, the president then goes back to the danger of having you deny these allegations of fraud. Let's listen to that part of the clip.
When you talk about no criminality, I think it's very dangerous for you to say that.
I felt then and still believe today that this was a threat. Others obviously thought so too, because some of Trump's more radical followers have responded as if it was their duty to carry out this threat.
My email, my cell phone was doxxed, and so I was getting text all over the country, and then eventually my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting. And then some people broke into my daughter-in-law's home, and my son has passed, and she's a widow, and has 2 kids, and so we're very concerned about her safety also. Because I knew that we had followed the law and we had followed the Constitution, and I think sometimes moments require you to stand up and just take the shots when you're doing your job, and that's all we did.
During the remainder of the call, the former president continued to press you to find the remaining votes that would ensure his victory in Georgia. Let's listen to a little more.
Why wouldn't you want to find the right answer, Brad, instead of keep saying that the numbers are right? So look, can you get together tomorrow? And Brad, we just want the truth. It's simple. And everyone's going to look very good if the truth comes out. It's okay. It takes a little while, but let the truth come out. And the real truth is I won by 400,000 votes, at least. So what are we going to do here, folks? I only need 11,000 votes. Fellas, I need 11,000 votes. Give me a break.
Many emails from electors also showed collusion to provide fake votes, making pithy comments calling them alternative votes, a reference to the Trump campaign line about alternative facts. Still more and more, as a cheated coup appeared not to be working, Trump flagrantly lied on the stage at January 6th about the election, and according to Mark Meadows and 3 other people who were privately confirmed to have been there but chose to speak with anonymity, they stated upon hearing that the protesters had put a noose and gallows up outside and chanted "Hang Pence," that Trump had allegedly expressed support for the idea. Meadows initially provided thousands of text messages in a subpoena to the court, but changed his tune suddenly, suing the court and Verizon to try and keep things privately. The House brought him in contempt of court, but the Republican-controlled Congress dismissed his charges to keep the information private. This is a near-endless litany of information, and I think in large part it's exactly why it's been so easy to twist and ignore the truth. If you want to believe the best in someone, and the evidence against them is so inaccessible and the accusations so unbelievably awful, it becomes very easy to just stop engaging, accept a more comforting answer that it must just really be a witch hunt, and that they're after nothing. Pile that on with the threats to people and their families' lives, and it's genuinely become something scary to talk about on such things publicly. For my part, I'm not in politics. I don't have any cushy job. I don't have any special funding. I think I've provided enough information here. The information is public if you want to learn more. And to my mama and papa, we can obviously just talk about things more in private, as I'm sure we would otherwise. I hope that you've enjoyed the information that I put together in this video as well. Initially, this was going to be the first half of the video. I was going to dedicate the second half to the ways in which Donald Trump is a precise antithesis for anyone who claims to serve Jesus or be Christian in any way. But I think for most reasonable people who would watch this far, knowing any scripture at all would easily turn someone against Trump. And knowing as much scripture as you can repeatedly shows not to support Trump. Instead, I'll just pass with alleged actions in private from Michael Cohen, who also took the fall for Trump's illegal misappropriation of campaign funds years ago. Mr. Cohen said that one day in 2015, he was brought into Trump's office where Trump was brandishing a printout of an article about an Atlanta-based megachurch pastor trying to raise $60 million from his flock to buy a private jet. Trump knew the preacher personally, and later, the man, Creflo Dollar, were among the people to pray over Trump in the famous photo in the Oval Office, as well as one of the evangelicals to meet with him in 2011 when Trump initially was considering running. Trump reportedly seemed delighted to Cohen, calling it an obvious scam and full of shit. They're all hustlers, Trump supposedly said. And this is genuinely just scratching the surface. The fact that Trump is still running and has so much support is really due to the intense disinformation campaigns targeting most people not adept with modern technology and algorithms, or the worse, targeting and abusing the faith that they have, their most sacred personal beliefs. The farther you fall into a hole, the more you feel the allure of the sunk cost fallacy. The fear that if you admit that you were mistaken, it's an embarrassment. It's too late to bear that sort of guilt. And so people retreat further and further into denial to protect a sense of self-worth. But there's nothing more respectable than someone being able to acknowledge fault and change. I'll admit, I felt a lot of satisfaction in 2016 when Trump beat Hillary, because I thought that she had snubbed the party of its rightful candidate. The Democrats were corrupt, and Donald Trump would be a loose cannon, an element of randomness, a wrecking ball to the corrupt corporate elitism. But he ended up being perhaps the most corrupt, spiteful, wicked person to have ever been captured and manipulated the hearts of so many otherwise good people. I wanted this video to focus purely on his performance in office and facts arbitrated by a court of law, to keep things objective for those who might genuinely believe that the economy and immigration would be better under him. I didn't even get into the rape conviction or the felony accounts. Threats from the Heritage Foundation, who in the last 10 years have also slowly become co-opted by the MAGA movement, pieced together Project 2025, a document written and organized by Trump staffers and donors, past and present. The leader of the foundation at the time said,
"We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be."
And this is still scratching the surface. The fact during discovery of Ghislaine Maxwell's case of the United States versus Ghislaine Maxwell, This is the partner of Epstein. We got records for flight logs that Epstein had 14 different saved phone numbers tied to Donald Trump, that Trump gave settled cases of accused assault. The fact that before justice could even be served in his court cases, the Supreme Court then ruled immunity on everything that he and any future president may do, upending literally the precedent that dates back to the founding of the United States, that violates the fundamental idea of checks and balances, and that we shouldn't have a king. And this blatant disgrace and treason to our democracy was just so that in case he gets elected before he can be convicted, then he can escape any prosecution under the law. It's a genuinely harrowing situation, and as already shown, many of the people pushing this for money are selling the American dream out willingly to good American patriots, knowingly lying about it in private messages, mocking the people who they are fooling. Please protect yourself. Protect our democracy. E pluribus unum. If you're not my grandparents and you have made it this far, please consider supporting my work on Patreon, Ko-fi, or directly on PayPal. My income is derived entirely from fan help and ad revenue on my channels. I normally talk about media I like, infusing social politics into my analysis, but have never been this political, and it's not really my preferred thing. It's very depressing. I considered and will probably consider more as I work on this if I should have even made this video, or should have left out the parts that state very specific things, as people's lives have been ruined, as you heard from the family of the Georgia electorate who refused to deny democracy its truth, whose safety and privacy was erased, who sustained threats of violence and rape and were victims of property crime. The vitriol to which dozens of previous Trump attorneys, friends, staff, and more have been endlessly harassed for speaking against Trump, normally only doing so once their back was against the wall and they weren't willing to serve a sentence of crimes that Trump ordered them to do while he got off scot-free. This script started as a lighthearted look at the facts of policy, but now it's kind of freaky and dark. And I don't want to risk my own safety by speaking too much on these topics. So even if you don't care about American democracy, you don't care about the Constitution, you don't care about what it means to be American or the American dream, you don't care about the blatant heresy and blasphemy of Christian faith that has been co-opted by Trump's disingenuous administration, then in the very, 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 very least, I hope that you can say that you won't support him for the fact that the economy and immigration were either objectively worse or virtually the same. Thank you.